Fernando with Texas United Realty, and today we're going to be focusing on basic steps on how to prepare for your buyer's initial contract offer. Ooh, say that really fast. So we're going to be focusing on that. There's several questions that always come up, and I just kind of want to have a sense of foundation for all of us to use. Um, so the agenda, what we're going to be focusing on is what are the basic steps to prepare for your initial offer? What are the forms that we normally use? How does a buyer agent communicate with the listing agent to send over the buyer's offer? Some tips, and then we can have a Q&A at the end. So initial steps, we can assume that the buyer has already sent you their pre-approval or has the proof of funds, which could be a bank statement. Sometimes they also use like Charles Schwab or any kind of stocks that they can sell and then be part of the proof of funds. But you do need that, and there are some buyers that are kind of skeptical about sending you that kind of information. It's okay to tell them to erase the account number. They can black that out, but they have to leave the full name and address on the proof of funds, for example. And of course, in this assumption, we're also saying that the buyer has already decided on a particular house. They would like to submit an offer. One thing that's a real good tip that we as new agents tend to forget, or we don't know how to do it, how to generate a CMA, is you should run a CMA, which is we also call comps, prior to submitting an offer. And this serves as a good idea to determine what the price of that house is it at market value? Because sometimes the buyers, they tend to say, well, what do you think? You think that it's too high? Or, I don't want to offer something. Or sometimes the buyers even try to, I think we got some feedback here. I'm going to mute some people. And sometimes the buyers, they want to lowball the offer sometimes. And you can just say, well, here's the CMA and here's the data that supports their market value. So, so it's always a good idea to do that. So what forms do we use? This is a typical question, especially when you're a new agent. It's kind of confusing. You're not sure what forms are there that you need to use specifically. Of course, and I have these colors on this lettering done a certain way here because of the importance. Of course, the first one is the information about broker services, which we also call an IABS. This is so important to have as the primary document. I know when a lot of us that when we went to school, they actually drilled down on that and told you how important this IABS is for. So in this assumption, when you're gathering the forms to submit for the initial offer, the IABS should have already been signed because you already started showing them houses and you're already engaged with them. So this form should already be initialed by the buyers. So other contracts, other docs that we use is of course the 1-to-4 contract. If it's single family, if it's a land, it probably is unimproved, and so on and so forth. Then there's third-party financing addendum or seller financing addendum, if applicable. So if they're paying cash, then there's no need to do the the third party or seller financing. One thing that's very confusing to new agents is, wait a minute, why is there two? And it's a little bit confusing. So the seller financing addendum, that's when the seller is selling it as an owner financing. So seller financing addendum, you can consider that as another description would be the owner financing. So that means that the owner is actually becoming the bank. So you would use the seller financing addendum. But if it's not an owner financing, then you use the third party financing addendum. So that would be FHA, conventional, VA, so on and so forth. Other forms that that you need to focus on, and if they're applicable, would be the HOA addendum, which we also call homeowners association. And then the MUD disclosure, which is we also call it a water district notice. Or if there's a septic tank, sometimes you're going to be helping people that are outside of the um, if everybody can please mute their devices. Okay, thank you. There might be where in rural areas they usually have a septic type of disposal of water, the dirty water, so that you would use that. Other forms, of course, is the seller's disclosure, which talks about the different characteristics of the house, what kind of problems they have, or they have had or don't have. Also talks about flooding and other things. And then if the house is built before 1978, do you use a lead-based paint addendum? Now, keep in mind, this is a little bit confusing with the lead base. Some people think that if the house is built in 1978, then you need the lead-based paint addendum. And no, it's prior to. That means 1977 or below. So that's the way you're supposed to treat it. Okay. Buyer-specific forms. These are additional forms that you need to have the buyer fill out. The general info you're going to have to sign as well as a buyer agent. But you have the information about special flood hazard. You have the general info and notice to buyer, inspector information, and then the wire fraud warning. Now, the wire fraud warning, I would like you to keep that, consider that very urgent to have done. There's been a lot of wire frauds happening with closings. I've been hearing a lot of horror stories about it. Where there's actual people, I guess they're called phishing, and they actually pretend to be the buyer or pretend to be the seller or pretend to be the title company, and they actually watch you for 45 days, all the communications you're going back and forth, and then eventually they become you. And then what they do is they'll say, oh, can you send the wire to over here? The one that I sent you earlier is not valid anymore. And then that's how they steal the money. So if for some reason your buyers or sellers, whoever you're working with, says, hey, I saw an email from somebody that says that they changed the routing number and the account number, immediately tell them, as a buyer or as a seller agent, immediately tell them to contact the title companies and say, hey, did you just change an instructions? Just to confirm. So that's really dangerous. So anyway, that's the importance of making sure the wire fraud warning is there and signed. Tips. You should have the buyer's complete name, no nicknames, because sometimes they might be called, Johnny or Nikki or something. Make sure you have the full names of the buyers, their email addresses, their phone numbers, all the details there, all their contact information. Now, .loop, a lot of us use .loop. It requires each buyer to have a unique email address. Okay, there's been situations where some of my students will tell me, hey, this is an elderly couple. They do sign electronically, but only one of them has an email address. Well, guess what? They have the other person, the spouse, has to create one. You cannot share email addresses in .loop. If you're using zip forms, yes, you can have the same email address, but not .loop. Okay. So gathering details of the property. First thing you should do before you start working on the documentation is you need to gather the data so you can fill in the contract. So you have to go into Matrix MLS and search for the property so you can gather the pertinent information. You're looking for a legal description. You're going to need that for the contract. You're going to need the year built. The reason why you need the year built, again, is for the lead-based form. Like in this example, in 1976, so guess what? You're going to need a lead form. If this was 1978, no, you don't need a lead form. So that's already telling you what forms you're going to be using by this information. Another thing that I notice some of my students always forget to look at is the exclusions. They have a hard time either not looking at this information, but this is really important. And it's displayed, just right there, ready for you to look at as an agent. But exclusions means what's not going to stay with the house. And in this example, it says washer and dryer. Well, whenever you're showing that house or you've shown that house, you need to remind the buyers, hey, guess what? The washer and dryer is not staying there. So this should be already something that you already know about when you're either going to show the house or after you show the house, to make it clear with the buyer that, hey, when we submit the offer, remember, washer and dryer is not included in that, will not be included in the deal. Another thing that that is very important is, do I need a HOA document? Well, here you're going to see management company, HOA name. It's going to tell you rolling fork and the phone number. So yes, it is an HOA. So you know you're going to need a form for HOA. Also, what's really important that as a new agent, you sometimes forget to look at is the financial information. So let's just say you're working with a buyer and the buyer's VA. He has a VA loan. Well, if the financing considered, that's what CNSDR means, considered, doesn't have VA, well, I think maybe before you show the house, you should contact the listing agent and say, especially if it's really important to the buyers that they're using a VA loan, to contact the listing agent to ensure that the buyer is going to, that the seller will accept a VA loan. The VA loan has a lot of requirements that the seller will have to conduct. It could be money towards closing costs, like a VA and FHA. Whenever the appraiser gets sent out to the house, and they're appraising on the house, and let's just say that the door, for some reason, the front door, it needs to be repaired. Well, the appraiser will say the house will appraise at X amount of dollars if seller fixes this door. In other words, it's mandatory. It's not like, he has a choice to fix it. No, it's a requirement in order to meet the appraisal. So keep in mind of the financing considered. This is really critical. And if they have a VA loan and you're showing 10 houses and all 10 houses just say cash and conventional, you might be wasting your gas and your time and their time and so on and so forth. So it's always better to confirm. And then the other thing that you're going to need for the HOA form is the other mandatory fees, the 150. This 150 does not mean it's the annual fee. The annual fee is up here, 450. This 150 is how much the HOA is going to charge for transferring the ownership from one person to the other. HOAs can charge whatever they feel like. Okay, so here it says 150, so that's good, but it might be more. You don't know for sure. But anyway, keep in mind that that's critical to understand. One tip: whenever you're gonna start working on contracts, hopefully maybe you have a big screen, but if you don't, you can still probably do it. Is try to split the screen of Matrix MLS and the contract itself. So like that you can see both of them together, and then like that you can kind of almost do a copy and paste. So that's just a little tip. And by the way, I put here the word date, and it's supposed to be data easier. So I apologize for that. Okay. Another thing that as a tip, is gathering additional information. A real common question that I always get, or new agents always try to figure out is there a MUD? Or what is a MUD, which means municipal utility district or water district. And I can show you in a minute how to invoke that to find that information. But also I noticed that sometimes Matrix MLS doesn't show you the full legal description, and that's really dangerous, especially when you're trying to put it in a contract. The contract has to spell out word by word, hyphen by hyphen, semicolon by semicolon, the full legal description. If it's very, very long, yes, you have to copy that whole long string. So that's important. And the best way to go is to go to, while you're inside Matrix MLS, go ahead and click on the tax account number. This is a hyperlink. You can actually click on it. And then what happens is oh my goodness, like it's slow here. There it goes. like my computer's a little slow. It actually shows you the property detail report. It's not refreshing here, but it shows you the property detail report, and the property detail report will show you an example of the if there's a mud. Sorry, I'm getting technical difficulties here. Here we go. Oh, that's weird. Let me. What's that? I'm going to do it again here. I'm going to use a different way to open this here. Apologize for the technical difficulty. I don't know why it's just not showing the screen. I'm going to load it a different way. So let's go to the section. Okay, here we are. So here's a property detail report. And the property detail report, when you click on that account number, it gives you a more detail of the property. It tells you the owner of the seller, you know, different information. But here it tells you the legal description, and if it's a very, very long legal description, you can just copy all of it from here. But you notice here too, it says mud information. The mud information, I get this question asked a lot, is, Fernando, I don't know how can I find if there's a mud? Well, now you can see that it says right here, mud. So, and you can actually click on the hyperlink and it'll tell you the mud information on that. So that's really helpful in this property detail report. Here again, you can see this is Rolling Fork PUD, which means Public Utility District. And the taxes that they charge is 0.385 for every 100 in value. So you can kind of calculate how much the mud charges for that. Okay, so this is really helpful. So again, let me just show you how to do that, since we were kind of with technical difficulties. So whenever you're in MLS, just click on the tax account number, and then it'll bring up this property detail report, which is real helpful. Okay. So here's an example of the 1-to-4 contract offer. A common question that I always get from students is, hey, there's a lot of things blank, you know, like it might be the blank seller, it might be a blank title company, you know, it just, sometimes there's just different things that are blank, and it's okay. Most of you guys have a mentor, and we can kind of give you direction on that. But this is what we consider a contract offer to begin with. It might not have a seller's name, okay? And the reason why it might not have a seller's name is because, of course, like I showed you up here, here's the seller, right? Patrick. But in my experience, sometimes it's not Patrick, because Patrick could have been deceased. And there's another person with the power of attorney, for example, or it might be an estate sale. So you really don't know who the seller is. So that's the reason why we normally leave it blank. I mean, you can put the name in there if you would like, but they may ask you to change it. So another thing that you really need to write in a contract. I know it's real simple to just like, and I'm looking at exclusions here, and I'm using the example of exclusion where the washer and dryer is not part of the deal. Try to be very descriptive. Okay, like here I have White Kenmore washer and dryer located in the garage. That's so specific. The reason why I want you to be specific is because a lot of us, or most of us, have 2 refrigerators or 3 refrigerators in a house. And let's just say that the kitchen refrigerator is not the one that's the exclusion. And it's a stainless steel refrigerator. But the one that's staying is the one in the garage. That can happen. Well, if you just type the word refrigerator under exclusions, we have no idea which refrigerator you're talking about. We have no clue. So be very specific. Say White refrigerator Kenmore in garage, or, you know, stainless steel refrigerator in kitchen. You know, Be very specific. The more specific you are in a contract, the better. And this helps a lot if for some reason, hopefully it never happens to us, but if we're ever going to get sued, lawsuit of some sort, the judge can't say, "Oh, what was your intent?" Right? They ask, "What was your intent?" Well, my intent was the refrigerator, in the garage or the kitchen. Okay. So, I have an example of a contract if y'all want to see one. So now you're all ready to email the listing agent with the contract offer. So you're all ready to go. You got all the forms filled out, or the ones that you're going to be doing. Um, and again, like I repeat myself here, that it doesn't have to be completely filled out, just, the main terms and conditions that you want to present. And usually the offer that we submit is the 1-to-4 or the third party financing. If it's cash, it's just the 1-to-4. Then we have the HOAs and the MUDs and seller's disclosures and lead base, whenever they're applicable. But one tip that I would like to give you, and usually this happens more than not, is you go show houses, especially a lot of us that work part-time and we show houses in the evening. Well, you get home at 9 o'clock, 9:30, and the buyers call you and say, "Hey, we want to submit an offer." Well, you kind of thought that they were going to submit an offer, but you weren't sure. Well, guess what? Now it's become urgent because you had spoken to the listing agent before and they tell you, "Hey, there's a lot of interest and we're waiting on some offers to show up." And then you tell that to your buyers, and guess what? Your buyers go, "Well, you better send one right now." Well, remember what I told you about all these other forms you need to fill out, right? Well, the reason why I have these in blue is like, hey, if it's urgent, just send the 1-to-4 and the third party. Get that signed by the buyers, initialed, signed, and send it off. That way, at least you got the foot in the door. Then work on the other forms and all. At least the anxiety and stress won't be as bad because you already got the offers in there. Okay, so that's a real good tip. I practice that quite a bit. So here's an example email that I normally suggest my students to send. To John, listing agent, subject. That's one thing that I want you to guys really, really hammer down. I notice a lot of agents, for some reason, the subject line, they never update it. And that's a pet peeve of mine. Even though you're communicating and doing all these things, if the subject matter changes within that email, go ahead and update the subject line or add to it, append to it. So, and one thing that I know you guys probably will never, y'all might not believe in this, but one day you might have 14 transactions that you're working on at the same time. I know you can't believe it because you only may be working on one transaction, but you may have 14 at the same time. Can you imagine you receiving 14 emails on the 14 properties? And you would have to open each one of them up to find out what property they're talking about. So it's very important to make sure that the subject has the address and what it's about. Okay, or you can just leave the address alone. Okay, so that's just one tip there. So here I have, "Dear John, listing agent, attaches my buyer's contract offer for your listing. I've attached the pre-approval letter." Of course, you always have to send the pre-approval letter or the proof of funds. Don't forget to send that. That's very critical. If not, they're not going to take you seriously, and they believe that your client's not pre-approved. So tell them I've attached the pre-approval letter, 1-to-4 contract, and the third-party financing addendum. And then, very important, state, "Please confirm receipt of this email offer." Why do I say that? Because I want them to tell me, did they receive my email? I don't need to know if they're accepting or reviewing my offer. I just want to know they got it. Because there's times where you send emails and all of us are busy. We all get a bunch of emails. We get spam emails and all this other stuff. And you want to know they got it. And then you're wondering, did they get it? Because they haven't responded back to you. And then a day goes by, your buyer's asking you what's the status, and you go, "Oh, I don't know, I haven't heard anything." Well, here you're telling them, please confirm receipt of this email. So usually in my experience, what happens is they just tell me received because they're in a hurry. They'll just say received, just one word, and I'm good with that. But at least I know they got the email. Okay. So that's one example that you can use, and you can copy, you can plagiarize this. I give you permission. Make sure you have your contact information. How they get a hold of you. I have seen a lot of agents when they're communicating that all I see is their name, like regards Fernando, and I'm like, what? How do they get a hold of you? Make sure your full information is there, because you're dealing with contracts, and you want them to call you. What if you forgot to put your phone number in there? So please ensure that you have the signature appropriate that belongs to you. So here's some tips. You should run a CMA to determine the market value of the property so that the buyer can decide on what they would like to offer. I put that in bold letters so you can kind of ensure emphasis. Have buyers full contact information and unique email addresses. If you have to submit an urgent contract offer, you can submit 1 to 4 and third party only, of course with a pre-approval letter or proof of funds. The contract may not be completely filled out. It doesn't have to be. There's going to be some missing parts, but that's okay. Of course, in your training, make sure that the mentor looks over it. And then in red, I have something two bullet items that are important. Make sure the buyer reads the seller's disclosure in its entirety. It may contain issues such as the house flooded, termite damage, roof issues, foundation issues. I have one of my students. She did not look at the seller's disclosure, and then she's telling me to look at her submittal of the initial offer, and I went into it was attached to the MLS, and I said, hey, did you read the seller's disclosure? And she's like, no. I said, the house is flooded before. And she goes, oh my God, they told me that they didn't want a house that was flooded. I go, well, it says on the seller's disclosure. She goes, I'm glad you told me. They end up not submitting an offer. So she would have been spending all her time and getting signatures when it says it was flooded. Another thing very important is make sure you verify what's excluded. Buyers usually assume that some appliances may be staying within the house, and that's fine with them, but you need to verify that they're not, or they're not going to be. Okay. So that's my presentation. While I'm setting up here, I was going to show you a contract that we can look at. Oh, I think I already got it here. Does anybody have any questions while I'm loading this contract up here?
I have a couple of questions.
Just don't forget to unmute your phone. Yes.
First, this is Natalia. And I am working with a VA, and I know that there are a couple of items that they can't pay for at closing. So I was wondering, when writing an offer for them, should I include a request for seller contribution to cover those fees?
Yes. And first, remember what I said in my presentation is they need to accept VA first of all.
Yeah, they do.
Okay. No, I'm just saying that's number one.
Okay.
Because if they don't accept VA, then we're wasting our time.
Right. Yeah.
And then what you do, and for everybody to kind of see what she's talking about. She's talking about this part right here, the financial considered. So they, like in this house too, they accept VA, as you can say. It says VA right here. So what you do is paragraph 12A1B. I call it the infamous paragraph 12A1B. That's where you put in what the lender, it has to be lender approved. Okay, you can't just put any number, but the lender has to approve whatever amount. So let's just say that the lender says no more than 6%. Let's just say they say that. Well, then that's all you can put. And you will put it right here in the paragraph 12A1B. And you put, but you don't put the percentage, you put an actual number like 3,000,
right,
4,000, 5,000. And yes, you can put this in the initial offer, correct.
Okay. And I would just get that percentage or amount from the lender before I send the offer.
Correct. Anytime you mess with paragraph 12A1B, lender has to say yes or no.
Okay.
If the buyer says, "Oh, I want 12,000," you tell them, "Look, I called your lender, and he said no more than 6."
Gotcha.
Yeah, because the lender is the one that approves that. Nobody else does. No, the title company doesn't approve it. Their parents don't approve it. It's only the lender. Now, keep in mind, whenever you put a number in here, let's just say it's $6,000. The seller, when he receives it, he's going to think 235 minus 6, which is a negative perception. That's the way sellers think. If you say 6, well, let's make it easy, 5. Then the seller says, "Oh, you're offering me 235, but minus 5 because you want help in closing costs. I'm only going to get 230." That's the way seller sees it, which is a negative.
But it's really true, isn't it?
It's bad for the seller, but good for the buyer.
Okay, I wasn't following you when you were saying negative. I thought you were saying that's not true,
No,
but it is really true.
It's a negative. It's a negative perception.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So if your person needs $2,000 in seller's contribution and you really want this house, it's okay if your person can afford to. If you offer $2,000 more over asking,
Correct.
Yes,
then they're getting their asking price. Then they're
Correct.
not insulted that you needed.
Exactly. And that's what thank you, Karen. And that's what I was going to say is, like in this example, let's just say it says 235 and paragraph 12A1B says 5,000. Then what you did is you added 5 to the number of the sales price. And so therefore, let's just say the seller wants 230, right? Well, he's going to get 230 because you added 5 on top of this number.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
But that only works if the what do you call it? The appraisal was.
That's the bad thing. That's what you got to worry about.
Right. Yep. Right. I had a realtor call and ask if they could offer 5,000 over asking, and I said, "Well, sure," because they needed 5,000 in closing. But then I was wondering about my appraisal, so I'm waiting for my appraisal to come back and see where we fall.
Exactly.
But if they. Yeah, you're saying yes, but then the appraisal, then you're back negotiating. So sometimes you can, it doesn't work.
It's all appraisal, but that's a whole different phase. Right now we're dealing with phase 1, which is the initial offer. But yes, correct, Karen.
One more question on the VA. I'm sorry.
No.
I know that the pest inspection is required for a VA. So is that something that the buyer still can order the inspection like any other, like a conventional loan, or does the lender have to do that?
Yeah, well, the lender always recommends an inspection, right? But because it's a VA, and when you're dealing with the government, your question is sometimes these houses already been inspected before. Is that what you're asking?
No, my question is, I know that the pest part or termite inspection is required for a VA loan.
Correct.
So my question is, like on a conventional loan, the buyer can choose any inspector and they can,
Oh, yes, they have to be
hire
certified.
the inspector at any time.
Yeah, the home inspectors have to be certified by FHA, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, does the lender take care of that or order that inspection?
No, they don't they take care of the appraisal side of ordering it. The home inspection can be ordered by the buyer, but it has to be like, they have to be qualified as that the home inspector has to have, I think there's an additional paragraph or something they have to have where they're compliant with FHA and VA. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you asking who orders the termite inspection? If the buyer, if the if your buyer orders it or if the lender orders it.
Yes,
is that what the question is?
That is my question. Yes.
That's a good question. I can't tell you if I know the answer to that. Normally, the buyer orders termite and home inspections, and the lender orders appraisals. That's standard. But when it comes to VA,
that's what happened in my contract that I have right now. The buyer ordered a home inspection during their 10-day option, and they also had a termite inspection during their 10-day option.
But was it conventional or VA?
Mine's FHA, so it's not exactly the same.
Okay, so FHA, the buyers can order home inspections and termite inspections, but she's talking about VA. And Natalie, the best thing to do is ask the lender. That's a very good question for a lender, because now you're very specific to the lender side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's helpful. I do have one more question. I'm sorry to monopolize the time.
No, I'm going to call you Fernando, because that's what Fernando does all the time too. Anyway, I always ask questions.
I think this is inappropriate, but you tell me if I'm wrong. I am representing the buyer, and the seller's agent has called me and asked me if my client, the buyer, is a W-2 employee or a 1099 employee.
Oh boy, that's none of
my
business.
My answer to them was that is exactly what I told them.
Mm-hmm.
I told him it should not make any difference.
Right.
Go ahead.
Now, the seller has the right.
Are you still there?
Yes. Can you hear me? Testing.
Fernando, we lost you.
Oh, really? Oh, no. Hold on. Hello?
Okay, I'm going to talk while he's not talking then.
Can you hear
someone
me?
Else tell me if I'm wrong.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
And finally, I told him I would ask my client if he was willing to share that information. But honestly, when I called my client, I said, you do not have to give him this information. If I was you, I would not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, good. The seller has the right to contact the lender directly. That's why we offer the pre-approval letters. Okay. And normally what's happening now, or has happened, is sometimes there's bust outs where they had a contract and it fell through, and then they got another contract and it fell through, and they're just kind of sick and tired of this. So usually the listing agent says, hey, we're going to contact the lender just to ensure that they're good, the buyers are good. And the sellers can do that. They can call the lender directly and say, hey, how well qualified are these people? But
you mean the listing agent?
I'm sorry, the listing agent. Yeah. But if the listing agent or the seller calls the lender and says, hey, are they W-9 or then the lender, of course, is going to say none of your business.
I would hope so.
Yeah. But they can call to find out how strong this buyer is. Yes. But that's as far as they can go.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't stop them from calling the lender.
Okay.
But the lender can only give them certain information. Yeah, but tell them no. Tell them no. The answer to your question is no.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I told him. He didn't want to take that answer, but.
Isn't it TMI? Isn't that what we're supposed to say? TMI.
Yeah. Well, doesn't that open up a whole nother area of discrimination?
Not financing. Financing is not part of discrimination.
Well, I mean, not legally, but it may not be one of the factors protected.
It's race. It's I think gender. It has nothing to do with financing. No, financing is not part of that list.
Legally. Morally.
Morally is different, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to look at that, you're going to say realtors take cash over conventional, then conventional over FHA, then FHA over VA.
Exactly.
I mean, so then that would be discrimination too. I mean, but you have the ones that are easier to close. That's why we like them that way.
Yeah. And I mean, sellers have a choice, and that's why I talked about it earlier, where if they don't want to accept VA and FHA, they just put that on the matrix MLS, and that's not discrimination.
But they can't change that during the contract period, right?
No, because once you're in, well, okay, the seller can't change anything, but the buyer can. The buyer can actually switch from FHA to conventional, conventional to FHA.
Right.
They can switch to
Right.
cash, but the buyer can do that all day long. The only problem that might happen is they would have to extend their third-party financing addendum.
It also slows down your close date.
Exactly.
Don't ask me how I know.
But you can change, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
But the seller can't change nothing. The seller can't terminate you. The only thing the seller can do is be a pain in the butt every time you say, "Can you extend this?" No. "I would like you to do that." No. You know, if the seller can just say no to everything you ask. And that's the only way.
So what happens if they say no to the extended closing date, but your lender needs that to?
It's the buyer's fault.
So you can lose out on the contract?
That's why you got to be very careful. And whenever there's a loan involved and your lender says, "Oh, we can close in 30 days. Yeah, sure. Still put 45. I don't believe no lender can close in 30 days. Because there are too many variables. There's the survey needs to be done. Appraisal needs to be done.
You better start praying.
No, whenever you sign this contract, paragraph 9 says you will close December 2nd or before. And that's set in stone.
I have one we're doing in 20, Fernando. You better start praying for me.
If the buyer can't make December 2nd, that's their fault. Okay?
Okay.
I'm sorry I sound a little bit like tough, but
oh yeah, we're scared of you.
I'm sorry, I get a little bit more get very excited, you know. But these are all good questions. And remember, here's the default. Have you read the contract? Here's the default right here. It tells you if the buyer fails to comply with this contract, buyer will be in default, and seller may enforce specific performances, seek such other relief as may be provided by law, or both, and terminate this contract and receive the earnest money as liquidated damages. Because it's the buyer's fault because they couldn't close. Right here it says. They should have pulled it in. They should put this in bold. Right? Now, if the seller can't close on that date, they're in default. It says right here. If seller fails to comply. Now, keep in mind, guys, everybody on the call, we're not attorneys. We're only realtors. If there's any situation or issue, please tell whoever you're talking to, client, buyer, or seller, that you're only a realtor and they need to consult their attorney. Do not get into, "Oh, well, you're okay." No. No, 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 no. Okay. Good questions, Natalie.
Natalia.
Oh, Natalia. I'm sorry. I just saw it right now. Natalia. Thank
Okay.
you. Sorry,
Thank you.
I'm getting old, so my glasses don't. Anyway, any other questions, guys? These are very good questions. Thank you for keeping me on my toes. And I know most of you guys are going, "God, Fernando's so rough."
Fernanda, can I get your notes, please? Very good.
Get my notes?
Yeah.
Oh, you want my presentation, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sure. Stas, right?
Yes.
Hello,
Stas.
sir.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is just a copy of one of my samples. You know the way a contract offer will look like. Usually, all the mentors have something similar to this. A survey, we usually ask for 2 days, buyer expense. Residential use 5. All these are default selections. HOA is here. It says is an HOA. Seller's disclosure, buyer has not received the notice within 2 days. We always answer the same way. Okay, they all look similar when they first start off. Buyer accepts the property as is.
Mm-hmm. And you said it should be in dot loop, right? When you refill it.
Well, when you in dot loop we have pre-filled some things. Yes, correct. Thank you for telling me stuff. Residential service contract 500. Again, if it's a loan, 45 days, and I'm talking about calendar days. We also count hurricane days. If you're in the hospital days, if you broke your foot days, it doesn't matter. 45 calendar days. In real estate, we don't count business days. Okay. Closing December 2nd there. Upon closing, paragraph 12A1B. This is my favorite paragraph right here when I'm representing the buyer. Memorize it.
Actually, can you tell me about this again? So settlement and other expenses.
Sure.
So why does the loan officer, mortgage lender is supposed to approve it?
Right. The reason why is because all lenders have a certain criteria that you have to pay a certain amount in closing costs. Because you have money reserved in the bank that you're going to be using to pay closing costs. And they're already calculated how much closing you need, how much money you need. And let's just say that there's $15,000 in your bank and you need $10,000 in closing costs. Well, most lenders require that you have 3 months of reserves where you pay the house note for 3 months. If for some reason you don't have a job or whatever it is, or you're having money problems, they want you to have 3 months of reserve money. And let's just say that 3 months of reserve money equates to $5,000. And you have to bring $10,000 to the table for closing. So that equals to $15,000. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they're looking at, that target. So whenever you say, hey, I would like to ask for closing costs or, this and that, what the lender says is, oh, okay, we'll ask them for, X amount of dollars. But they have a formula that they have to mess with that 15,000 that you have in that bank. So I don't know how they work it out, but there's some kind of formula. But you always need to ask the lender to give you approval. Yeah.
But you said, so before I submit an offer, I need to ask a loan officer first?
Correct. Yeah, it would be helpful because especially if the buyers.
Yeah, what if
if the buyer, listen, because you guys are going to get to know the buyers, right? And they're going to say, oh man, I really would like and the buyers are going to tell you right away, I really would like at least $3,000 towards seller, that the seller will help me with buyer closing costs. So they're already giving you a number or maybe a percentage. Well, when they're talking that way, you might as well talk to the lender and say, hey, what's the cap? How much can I ask up to?
Okay, so I can basically ask my loan officer in advance.
Correct.
So what's the cap for that?
Correct. Yeah, especially when you get the pre-approval letter, because you're going to get a copy of the pre-approval letter. You can ask them at that moment.
Okay.
Yeah, so like that you already know, you don't have to be like at 10:30 at night trying to call the lender.
Yeah, this was my my concern about this.
Right.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then notices, please try to at least put an email in here.
Mm-hmm.
This is so important. People leave in blanks all the time. Look how important this is. All notices from one party to the other must be in writing and are effective when mailed to, hand delivered, or transmitted by fax or electronic transmission. So when there's something going on with your transaction, and the title company needs to communicate with both parties, or the lender needs to communicate with both parties, and you leave this blank, what are they going to do? So try not to leave it blank. Okay. Paragraph 22, here's all the forms that go with it. Oh, one thing is if you're ever dealing with a conventional loan, you need to select this addendum. Okay? Whenever it's a conventional. Keep in mind that these are only addendums. This is only for addendums. And then the most important paragraph, paragraph 23, never leave it blank. I never want to see any contract that has blank. It's empty. Okay. Oh, another thing that I found out is an agent some time ago forgot to put their percentage in here. And guess what the listing agent said? Oh, are you waiving the 3%? That means you don't want your commission? Because the buyer agent forgot to put 3% on here. That means you're waiving it.
You mean you guys, I thought that was filled out in ours automatically on Dotloop.
Yeah, it is automatically on Dotloop. Okay. But you know what happens sometimes?
It's already in there.
No, but what's happened sometimes when you're messing with Dotloop and you're going in there and it tells, when you edit something, it says, would you like to, this document has been signed before. Would you like us to, I don't know, allow you to modify it or something? And then who knows what can happen. I don't trust computers sometimes. I'm a little paranoid.
You're from old school.
There you go. I've seen things happen. I've seen viruses. I used to work in IT. So anyway, so I know I talk a lot, but thank you, everybody. I don't have anything else, but I'm here if you guys have any other questions.
By the way, so if you have to change some things in the contract, add some information about buyer's phone number, or
right,
stuff like that, how do we do it?
Okay, so if you're in the initial offer that you send to the listing agent, and they're usually come back with a counter offer, or sometimes they say, get out of my face, but sometimes they come out with a counter offer. That's where you can do some corrections, and whenever you submit another offer, you have to use this offer that we have right here on the screen and just fix it, whatever if you find any errors. But let's just say that is your question more like if the contract is already executed and you found an error?
So let's say not an error, but let's say I want to add some additional information on it.
Sure. Right. So every time you add something to a contract, let's just say that you want to add some information here, or it's the wrong address, right? The wrong email. Yes. Just do a strikeout. Strike it out. Mm-hmm. And then put initials around, put the new email address, for example, and then put initials. Never use whiteout.
Initials for
always strike out and add, and then put initials.
Initials for whom? For everybody?
From the buyer and the seller.
Buyer and seller, okay.
Yeah. Anytime you do, let's just, because I see sometimes some of my students that forgot to do a checkbox here, let's just say it was lead base and they forgot to checkbox it. If they add a new checkbox, then they have to initial by buyer and seller next to that X.
So in a dot loop, you would insert a text box, you put the email in there, and then you insert initials next to them, right? Or somewhere beneath everything.
Yeah, because in dot loop,
next to the change, where people are aware that was what you just changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, dot loop is a little bit interesting because when you open up to edit, it acts like, do you want to wipe out all the signatures? Which is what you don't want to do sometimes. But the best thing to do in dot loop is to save it as a PDF file and then upload it again, the PDF, and then do what you just said right now, which is make the corrections.
Okay.
That's better to do that.
Okay, it's a great tip. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Man, you guys are sharp tonight. It must be the Astros. Are the Astros winning? I haven't heard anything yet.
3-1. Astros are winning.
Oh, good. And we have it recorded on our webinar too. Good. All right, guys. Well, I know everybody has to work, but the good thing is tomorrow's Friday, so that's good news. Y'all enjoy everything, and please contact your mentors if you have additional questions. I'm also always available if you guys want to talk to me directly as well, and I'm here to help you. Thank you, and have a nice night.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
All right,
Fernando.
sure, bye-bye.